Hi there, Miss Watson.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am fabulous.
Great.
All right, so we're going to talk about your lesson from yesterday. And just a reminder of our coaching goals for this set of 5 weeks. You will follow up explicit directions with celebrations and consequences with a 1-to-1 ratio. That's the consistency goal that we have. You will allow the TAs to manage the timers for activities that they run while you manage the ones that you run. And then you will ensure that the exit ticket criteria and objective match, which is something that we've been working on and it's been getting better. And you will ensure that the teacher moves in between actually sets students up to be successful on the exit ticket. Okay. So, how do you think the lesson went yesterday?
I thought it went pretty good. I think the students were pretty on task for the most part. The whole time there's a couple off-task moments, just quick fixes though. And they were right back on. I think that class did a great job. The following class didn't do as great, but they still got a lot done. I was really happy with the amount of progress that the students made, and I think today is going to be a better day because of it.
So you said the class before that didn't do good.
No, the class after.
Or after, okay. Why do you say that?
I think they just came in a little more fired up being the last class of the day. A little upset that they didn't have gym and that they were still in the health room. Maybe the change of scenery going to the library kind of threw them off. But usually that class is pretty solid. Probably could have moved a couple seats around.
Okay. So I noticed that, so what I noticed is that students had the opportunity to actually think about different situations that could happen and think about how they could actually respond to those situations. I thought that you did a good job building relationships with students, circulating from each of the groups and talking and laughing with the students. That was good. And then also there was one group where they were actually talking about their decisions that they would be making in certain situations. So I thought that was good. Question: as you were circulating to each of the tables, what did you notice about the students in their discussion, the discussion that they were having?
It's a good question. I noticed that they were actually kind of staying on task more so than I thought they would. I thought there would be a few more distractions or interactions, especially with the different scenarios that they're coming up with, and so I thought they could be somewhat misleading. Some of the students were kind of confused about what a couple of the topics were asking. And
the topics on the strips of paper they were creating?
Yes. Yeah. So for instance, somebody might have put an emotional safety question under a physical safety question, or when it came to our health topic, which is one of the scenarios that they have to come up with, which is like healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, stuff like that. They would say, instead of coming up with the scenario, they'd be like, eat a cheeseburger, yes or no? It's like, all right, well, this is not exactly what we're asking. It was more so I was giving them the example of if your mother's buying dinner every single night and she's like, hey, this week we're gonna have Burger King all week. Like, what do you say? What do you do? And they're supposed to come up with different responses, but they also are supposed to come up with a scenario. That was just an example I gave them to kind of fix where they were being misled.
Okay. That's a good point. I'm gonna come back to that.
Okay.
So keep that thought in your head. So what I noticed when I was, circulating and talking to the students is that the students were confused about what it is that they were producing. So one group thought that they were, one group just wasn't able to articulate what they were doing. They started trying to explain to me, then they was like, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing. Then the other group was saying that they were just writing like physical safety or health or like all of the different categories that the scenarios would go under on a card, and then they would pull the card, and then somebody
would on the spot.
Right. That's what one group said. But then the other group said that the game was like apples to apples.
Yes.
So
each group was coming up with their own version of the game.
Okay.
They were creating a game for it, using the 6 different subjects that we had: emotional safety, physical safety, school, health, using substance, and peers and relationships. So they're supposed to come up with a few questions or scenarios, which each of those categories, and create a game based on it.
So,
But
so there was no guidelines.
their job was to make the game using those 6 groups, coming up with scenarios and responses for it.
Okay. And like, how would they know what should be in there? Like, I see that you gave. So it sounds like you gave them freedom to make the game however they wanted to, as long as they had the 6 categories and the scenarios.
The 6 categories. So the scenarios for the 6 categories. Yes.
Right.
So their job is to make the rules of the game, create the game card or the game pieces, and create the scenarios and responses. Today we're going to be, they might have 5 minutes to finish the game because I know a couple groups weren't done. So they get about 5 minutes to finish the game. And then we're going to present the games to the class, and we'll get an opportunity to kind of go from table to table, play a couple of them, and then we're going to take our test.
So did you give them guidelines though, around what needed to be in there, like some sort of rubric?
I didn't pass out a rubric.
Okay.
But I informed them as to what would be on it, and I had them write down the 6 different categories. I didn't have them write down the expectations, and that's why I was, going around from table to table and helping and, talking through some things. But yeah, there was an apples to apples game. One of the games was tic-tac-toe, and
Nobody explained that.
it's super cool.
Okay. And so you said that you didn't give out a rubric, you didn't have them write down expectations, and one of the groups wasn't able to explain what it is that they were doing. So how do you think that you could go about ensuring that, like, moving forward, if you was to like do this game again, like ensuring that everybody knows exactly what is expected of them when creating their game?
Probably pass out a rubric and have a full-blown example. I did have an example going around of like a game that I made. It was Candyland type deal that the students were able to reference and look at. And we kind of walked through it in the beginning of the class, and I explained it, more in detail than I did right now. And I was like, so you're doing this, but create your own. You can use my layout. You can make your own, whatever you want. And students would come up with their own original game, and then I would kind of help them see how they can make it more so based for our material.
So that was my next question, was if you modeled it for them. So did you model for them how to create a game, or did you just give them like an example of one that you had done?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
And how did it go when you modeled?
Like I said, really, I think it went really good considering. I think some of the students were off task or maybe a bit confused. But I think as I went around talking with them, it became clearer and clearer, and they did a great job.
So it's 2 pieces I see here that we just talked about. So the first one, you were saying that how, like, moving forward you would have a rubric. So that means like planning with the end in mind. So just making sure that you know exactly what the set of expectations are for the students, and then also what it is that you want the end product to look like. So by the end of the day, what did you want them to have?
Right. Are you asking me? By the end of the day, I wanted them to be either done or very close to done with their game.
Right. But what would the game consist of?
I mean, I have the rubric.
Ms. Wooper, please come to the principal's office, Ms. Wooper.
But it needs all 6 categories, multiple questions for each scenario, given responses, and the rules, pretty much. And then today, when we complete the game and start, present it, perform it, presenting is only it's gonna take a minute, for each student, 2 minutes tops. or not a student for each group. And then as we're going around playing the games, each student's gonna have a piece of paper, and they're gonna be writing reflections. So while they're playing the game, they might do a 20-second pause, write down a quick reflection about why they chose their scenario, why they chose their answer, and I'll be collecting that.
Okay. So I think that what the two pieces that I'm pulling right now is the rubric, having a rubric and the expectations laid out for students on a piece of paper so they can actually reference it later, because a lot of students or some of the students didn't know what was expected of them, and so they had nowhere to go to reference it. So you had to walk around to give them, to review all the expectations with them because they couldn't reference it again on their own. So that's going to be the first thing, is creating that rubric and planning with the end in mind. And then the second piece that just came up was modeling for the students. So you said that you model for students, what the game creation should look like, and you provided an example for them. But you were saying how some students were off task doing the modeling. So
they weren't off task while I was modeling. I had everybody at level 0 paying attention during that. Just it didn't click for everybody. As I was going around and just seeing some misconceptions that were going on. Like for instance, the group that you had walked by wrote down, like physical safety on a card, health on a card, and their game, they had a great game. They just didn't have any of the scenarios written. They were just going to go out of their memory or creativity on the spot. And that's what I told them. I was like, hey, I'm happy you know what we're talking about, and I had them give me examples verbally of different scenarios for the stuff, and they knew what they were doing based on their questions. But I said I can't grade that. When I go home to grade, all I see is this, and I can't remember what you guys are talking about. So they understood that after I spoke with them. And
so what did they end up doing?
I started writing the questions, scenarios on the back of the card.
Okay. So that's good that you give the feedback in the moment. So what do you think you could have done differently during your model that would have ensured that students were able to explain it to somebody else later?
Probably could have did a check for understanding, more checks for understandings. I had a couple students share out, but I could have picked more of a cold call situation instead of I think I had them raise their hands. I could have had a turn and talk where they talked with a neighbor and did their best to explain what the activity was supposed to look like.
Is this after you've been explained the entire game, or?
Yeah. Well, just in sections, kind of.
Exactly. So the best thing is to break it up. It's called chunking, right? So instead of just going over it and explaining the whole entire activity and then saying, oh, so what are you all gonna do? If you break it up into those pieces and chunk each piece of the directions that you want to give, and after each one, all right, I'm gonna do a turn and talk after this first part. After the second part, I'm gonna cold call a few students, and then on the third part, I'll do parent share, and then the fourth part, have them share our whole class again. And then you've been able to check for understanding along the way to make sure that they were following along. And at some point you cold call, so it wasn't just students who were volunteering. So that way you were checking for understanding of multiple students. You follow what I'm saying with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I want to do today is I want to go back to this lesson that you did yesterday, and I want us to plan this lesson with the end in mind, creating a rubric of expectations so that students know what is expected of them, and then also looking at how we can chunk the lesson or chunk the explicit directions that we're giving students at the beginning, the modeling we're doing to show them how to do the activity, looking at how we can chunk those and planning how we can check for understandings throughout.
Okay.
Cool?
Sure.
All right.
I'm just going to pull it up because I already have a rubric created that they made.
Okay. When you ready, let me know.
Yep. I'm just looking for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to make one.
Okay. Go right on here if you want to. Or do you want to type this stuff on?
No, I'll probably write it here.
Hmm?
I'll write it down here.
Okay.
We'll create one.
Okay. So by the end of this, the lesson you did yesterday, by the end of it, what was your objective?
The objective was that students will be able to create multiple scenarios for the 6 important categories in a decision-making type game. Can you read that back to me?
Students should be able to create multiple scenarios for the 6 important categories in a decision-making game.
Say it one more time.
Students should be able to create multiple scenarios for the 6 important categories in a decision-making game.
Yes.
So they are creating multiple scenarios, which is why you have the other group start writing it down. It has to relate to the second point. And then that's all they were doing yesterday, right? Creating the scenarios.
And they had to create the rules to their game, so write down the rules too.
Okay, that's a part of their game.
I think so.
And then today is when they'll actually be applying the
Mhm.
decide.
Yep. So
Steps.
it was kind of weird just because my first time doing any kind of already created curriculum. It's lessons 5 and 6 are kind of combined with the whole creating a game and then decision making. So the knowledge objective was apply knowledge and safety in decision making scenarios. So we're coming up with the scenarios, and then now today they're gonna be able to play the games for their own game, other people's games, and actually apply knowledge about safety when making decisions.
Got it. All right. So if our objective is for them to be able to create these multiple scenarios using the 6 important categories, and you could, I started drawing the rubric right here.
Okay.
So for the rubric, we need a mastery,
Mm-hmm.
partial mastery, and non-mastery. If students do extremely well on creating these creating these games, what will be the components of it? Like, what would the perfect
They did
game look
a
like?
perfect game.
Mm-hmm.
They have, let's say, 5 to 6 questions for each, or 5 to 6 scenarios for each category.
What are the categories? Are they called decision-making categories?
I just said categories. I don't have a specific name for them. Those are the 6 categories that we're focusing on for our decision-making process
Where did these categories come from?
the curriculum.
Did they ever refer to the categories or something?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can look back though in a little bit.
All right. Something to think about what the categories stand for. So 5 to 6 scenarios for each category.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else?
Rules to the game. Clearly identified rules.
Okay.
And a clear start or finish to the game. Start and finish to the game.
As you were wrapping up yesterday and you were looking at games, did you feel like students, any groups had those 3 categories all down?
I think that, with the exception, the one group didn't have the rules written yet, but I had a group that had all those things, like they're more than likely going to get, mastery. I had another group that was close, but they probably didn't have the 5 to 6 questions for each category just yet. That was the group that needed to write them down. They had 5 to 6 questions for each category, but they needed to put them on paper and actually create the scenarios instead of going off the top of their head. But they had enough materials ready for it, so they'll be able to finish that today quickly.
Okay. And so what I'm processing right now is I'm trying to think about the learning that will be taking place, right? Because I know that most of the learning will take place today because they're actually applying the decide steps to make decisions in those scenarios that they haven't. But at the same time, I'm thinking like, how could yesterday be a learning process as well, right? So a clear starting into the game, okay, and then rules, clearly identify rules to the game. That's like that's not something that's like a learning process.
Right.
So
I think the creativity aspect of it is learning process. When you're actually creating something, you're learning more about it because you're able to teach it to them. Or you have to be able to teach your game to somebody else, and for you to teach somebody, you have to know it.
Right. So, but that won't be you being able to explain the rules to them. That won't be like, you're not learning anything by being able to explain the rules. At least anything that's related to your objective.
I think what I'm saying is like having to thoroughly think about the different scenarios that you're creating and how they apply to the different categories is the learning part.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Because I was saying these last 2 categories, like they're not going to give you a big bang for your buck in terms of the learning that's taking place. So that's why I was coming back up to this first one where it's like you have to create 5 to 6 scenarios for each of the categories, which means that you have to thoroughly know what those 6 categories mean.
Right.
So that's when they're applying that knowledge by saying, okay, I actually can tell you what type of scenarios fit under these 6 categories. So it's kind of like they're ensuring that the categories actually align, or the scenarios align with their categories.
Yep.
So that definitely should be an objective. So students will be able to
align their scenarios with the categories.
Students will be able to accurately align their scenarios to 6. We need to figure out what they mean. The 6 important categories. Okay. And so
It's like just key components to like healthy decision making.
Got it.
Yeah.
So the 6 decision making categories.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you go and you grade these games, you're going to be looking to make sure that the scenarios that they created actually, because you told that one group, well, when I go home to grade these, I can't grade what you came up with on the fly.
Right.
So you got to write them down. So when you're looking at those scenarios, your job is to make sure that they accurately align to the 6 categories, right? Yeah, okay. So that's how you will be checking for understanding. Okay. And then what will be a 2?
Avalon was in my dream a couple days ago, and he was talking to me. It was awesome. Avalon's the silent ones.
I know.
Doesn't say a word.
I asked him one morning. I was like, "Do you talk at home?" And he was like,
I don't know. I get it.
But he said, "No, I ain't talking here." What about partial mastery? What would partial mastery look like?
3 to 4
3 to 4
scenarios per category. And then unclear rules. Or rules are there, but
Are you gonna write this down?
kind of unclear. I thought we were just going to do that. Yeah, I can do that. That's fine.
You said rules are.
There, but at times unclear or kind of unclear, and then one would be little to no rules at all.
And then the clear starting any time. What would that be like?
Not a clear start or end.
And then non-nasty?
0 to 2 scenarios. No to very unclear rules. And no start to finish game.
Your rubric is created.
Sweet.
Feels nice, doesn't it?
Feels good. What you talking about?
Sound like the second graders.
What are fish? Fish live in water. They have backbones and are cold-blooded. This means their body is not. You want to read this? This means their body temperature is the same as their surroundings. Most fish have skin that is covered with scales. Most fish have gills, which enable them to breathe. Oh, wait, be nice.
Cool. Alright. So now we got our end, we had our objective, we got our end in mind. So now when you go about explaining this to them about how they need to carry this out and modeling for them how to create this game, now we gotta think about how to chunk it.
Right.
Give them some, check for understanding.
Right.
Give them some, check for understanding.
Hey, we're gonna be creating a game today for the 6
You
different.
wanna like get your computer out, open your computer, get this.
You want me to type it all out?
We're planning.
Well, we've done with this lesson.
Right, but I want you to understand how the process goes so that you could implement it moving forward.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
Start over what I was just saying.
Yeah.
All right, class. Today we're gonna start. Today we're gonna create a game based on the 6 different decision-making categories that we've been learning about the past few days, and we're gonna apply our. And by the end of class today, I'm getting mixed up. By the end of tomorrow, ideally, we're gonna be playing these games and using the decision-making model to answer the different scenarios that we come up with. Is that shaky? How's shaky?
But what is an opportunity for you to check for understanding there? After
What
you
are we
finish
gonna be doing
saying that?
today? Curtis?
Or what do they need to know in order to do the things that you just said?
The 6 categories?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, quick reminder. Curtis, what's the first what's one of the categories out of 6? I'll put it here on the board. Physical safety, great job. Somebody raise their hand, tell me another. Okay. Emotional safety, great job. All right. Jaleesa, why don't you go ahead and tell me another one?
Okay. Now, during this time, what are you going to be doing?
Writing these on the board
Okay.
and giving an example. Right, physical safety. So we know that physical safety is something that will put your body in harm's way. Could be, and this is the example I was using yesterday. Somebody says they want to beat you up after school. What do? It's a little quick scenario. Some kids are like, "Oh, I'm gonna go home." I'm like, okay, healthy option, right? that would be a good response. Go home, avoid it. Some kids were like, well, I'm gonna square up with them, like just being funny. And I'm like, okay, while some people might do that, it's not the healthy decision. And being in health class, we're focusing on the healthy. So for your game, if you want to say the correct answer, it has to be the healthy answer. So going home, telling an adult, avoiding it would all be great answers. Marquise, give me the second one. And then continuing on briefly with that.
Okay. And then how do you explain to them how to create the game?
All right, so we just got a quick refresher on the 6 different categories. Now when you're creating your game, I want you to come up with 5 to 6 scenarios per category. Okay, so that's 5 or 6 scenarios or questions for each one of these 6 categories. For instance, my game is right here. It's kind of like Monopoly is the way I viewed it, or Candyland, if you guys have played any of those games. You see I have my game board and I have my squares here. Each square for my game is going to be labeled. PS stands for physical safety. ES, emotional safety. H, health. And I have this written on the board as well at the time. So all this stuff's written. I wasn't in my classroom yesterday. I had to go to the library. So I had a sheet on each table that had that stuff written. And if somebody's piece lands on my board or lands on, they roll a dice, if they land on this square, it says PS, I would go to my physical safety card pile and I would pull a card that has a scenario on it. That person would have to answer the scenario. If they answer it correctly and in a healthy way, then they get to move to that spot. If they answer it incorrectly, they have to stay where they are. To win this game, you have to get around the whole board. All right, so Curtis, I'm just using the same names just because I don't got to keep making up names. Curtis, what does the PS stand for? Is that correct? Is he right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. What do we think? Okay, great. Yeah, you're right. Physical safety. I'm glad you knew that. And we know that kind of question has to do with our body because we just spoke about it and keeping it out of harm's way. Okay, so this question says, and I would ask him the question, what'd you do, Curtis? What'd you do in that scenario? Walk me through it. It's like, oh, I'd go home because I don't want to get beat up and I don't want to get in trouble in school. It's like, all right, do we agree that that was a healthy question or a healthy response, or was that unhealthy? It's like, raise your hand if you think it was healthy. Raise your hand if you think it was unhealthy. Well, side chatter at that moment. All right, clap once if you hear my voice. Come back. And then
So
say
right
that was
now-
a healthy response. You move forward.
So right now you